Storm. This is Alex Wright calling from Germany, and you are listening to WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum.
Hey there, all you savages. Welcome back to Wrestling's Glory Days weekly podcast, WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. My name is Steve, and with me is the Scum. It's been a crazy week in wrestling. Royal Rumble went down last week. A lot of controversy there. Very interesting heading into WrestleMania season. Scum, what's going on, my brother?
Not too much here, Steve. As you said, very interesting week in the world of professional wrestling. Always a pleasure, like I like to say, to be back with you, my longtime tag team partner. Always a pleasure to be doing business over on Facebook with the boys at Wrestling's Glory Days. And be a pleasure today to throw four fingers in the air, my friend, with Steve and the Scum become official sponsors, so to speak, of Tully Blanchard Enterprises.
I'm ready to hop on board, man. Tully Blanchard's going to be a great guest, along with all the great guests we've had this season so far. Man, it's been awesome. We have had Jim Cornette. We've had Kevin Von Erich. Of course, a really cool take on the world of professional wrestling from Just Incredible. That just hit the airwaves here recently. Speaking of which, I wanted to get that out there. We're going to be on Wrestling Inc. Radio very soon, man. I look forward to that. We'll get back to that here. I know you wanted to talk about that in just a second. But all the other guests we got coming up this week, I'm really excited. Tully Blanchard was one of my favorite guys growing up as a kid. Member of the Four Horsemen. Some great feuds with Dusty Rhodes. Some great feuds with Magnum TA. That I Quit match, of course, extreme favorite on the internet. So enjoy that. And enjoy the full-length interview from Tully Blanchard. He'll be up here shortly. But Scum, a lot going on, my man.
Absolutely, Steve. I'm not sure who placed this here, but I'm looking above me, and there's a little metal hook on the ceiling, and there's a 1982 style nylon red duffel bag hanging from my ceiling. appears to be some loose change, couple of loose ciggies, and it looks like it's wet or something, like a half drinking Coors Heavy in the bag. I don't know if there's a ladder over in the corner. I'm not really sure what's going on there.
Oh man, you better look out. Some legendary battles there. Magnum TA, Tully Blanchard kicking the living crap out of each other for minimal money. Well, we hope to hear a lot about that from him. He's going to be on very soon. But Scum, who do we have coming up? I know we got a couple more guests in the tank. So tell our listeners who we got coming up, man.
Absolutely. Next week should be one of our most interesting interviews to date. One of the greatest heel performers of all time. Not to mention a guy whose mind is renowned in the world of wrestling behind the scenes as working in creative, and that will be the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, Steve. Now, those legendary years in Florida that he spent with the battling with the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, that great feud that I know you and I watched alongside one another with Chris Benoit and WCW in the mid to late 90s, and just grabbing a collar in each other and just belting each other in the face repeatedly, rapid fire, all the way up. You know, he had a big hand in the creative there during the Nitro days and the whole NWO era and the big boom. I mean, he was certainly a big part behind the scenes there when Nitro had their run where they were actually ahead of Raw.
Yeah, he's definitely around at a very influential time. But like you said earlier, Scum, he's been around the world. He's a territorial wrestler. He's pretty much seen the gambit of all the popular guys that from the Glory Days Classic Wrestling. So it's going to be good to hear his interpretation of, a lot of the things, especially like what you were talking about in that late 90s area, WCW. But, overall, even getting back into the 80s and some of the different angles that he came up with, the whole, I'm sure we'll get into the devil worship and all that too. So one of the most sadistic rule breakers of all time. And I think that's why I love him so much. But, like you were focusing on there, man, he had one hell of a wrestling mind too.
Absolutely. And Kevin Sullivan, I'm looking forward to that interview as much as I have any of them. And then coming up the remainder of the month and heading into March and into the spring, we got a plethora of great names coming up. I mean, we got B. Brian Blair from the Killer Bees coming on the program. We got a part 2, a return to the show that'll be coming your way toward the end of this month with Diamond Dallas Page, which will kind of coincide with yourself and I getting a chance to go down and do a workout with DDP at the Accountability Crib, which I know we're both looking forward to. That'll be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We got the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, coming up. We have our first ever tag team on the same interview coming up heading into the spring, where I'm proud to announce that we're going to have maybe the most popular team of all time. Definitely in the, they're always rocking in the Carolinas when it's Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express, Steve.
I'm going to tell you guys now, we recorded the Manny Fernandez interview already. Do not miss that interview. It is awesome. This guy's great. One heck of a storyteller along the way. He's seen a lot of action, this guy, and certainly hardcore to the bone, my brother.
Well, and a longtime enemy of the Rock and Roll Express, another future pair of guests that we have coming on. We'll also be talking, Steve, one that I'm really looking forward to. I know we have had a couple times Just Incredible, but to touch on the Extreme, maybe the most recognizable face from that ECW area, the man who kind of turned it from Eastern to Extreme, the franchise Shane Douglas is going to be joining us on the show coming up.
Oh, I can't wait to hear some of his stuff, man. ECW was amazing to watch. That kept, or I shouldn't say kept us watching wrestling, Scum, but I think it certainly piqued our interest again when it started hitting the mainstream as a wrestling fan, watching it from the ECW arena out of Philly. That's when I picked it up, in that mid to late 90s era. Great stuff there. I mean, shit. So many people went through there on their way to stardom. I mean, Austin, Foley, not to mention all the guys there that actually made the place glued together. Tommy Dreamer, Just Incredible, Shane Douglas, Raven. All those guys were really good performers and went on to do better things. Bubba Ray Dudley. There you go. The whole Dudley family were hilarious. But, good to see those guys having success still to this day. So Shane Douglas is going to have a lot to say there. So I'm very interested.
Yeah, can't wait for that. So I can't wait to jump in with both feet here. Like I said earlier, maybe sneak up on someone at a gas pump and take their legs out with a tire iron, a la our guest today, Steve, Tully Blanchard.
Yeah, but you always have to be very sharply dressed. When you're a member of Tully Blanchard Enterprises, you have to have an image. You have to have the right manager. You have to have the right woman by your side. You have to have that television title or U.S. title or U.S. tag title or any of the gold that Tully Blanchard held properly held up against the shoulder with the forearm. Very nice stuff from Tully Blanchard. Always delivered a great promo on those TBS wrestling shows.
Certainly. Always a symbol of excellence, as I believe they used to like to say when you're talking Tully Blanchard. Steve, I got to admit, and I'm hoping, I don't know this for sure, and I don't think that it could be a possibility, but you know me, you know my taste. I'm really hoping maybe that Tully brings the perfect 10 into WGD Studios with us. The Scum's always been a little sweet on Baby Doll.
Oh, Baby Doll's certainly one of our favorites on the show. Yeah, I was looking for her at WrestleCade. She wasn't there, but I wanted to do shots, man. I was walking around with a bottle of Jack in my back pocket. Never ran into her.
Well, hey, you never know. Hopefully at some point she'll drop by the studios and that, give the Scum that chance he's been waiting for since 1984.
Yeah, taking him from another Four Horsemen member to maybe walk that aisle or maybe take a ride on Scum Mountain.
Yeah, it might be getting up there in years, but still got the longest line in the park, baby.
And that's why they call him the Scum. Well, we're going to go to Tully Blanchard right after this.
Wow! G'day, mateys! This is WWE legend Bushwhacker Luke here. If you want to know anything about the past of wrestling, the history of wrestling all around the world, and get the scoops of the day, tune in to WGD Weekly and listen to Steve and the Scum. They're the ones to listen to for the top scoops. See you, folks. Whoa!
All right, Scum Nation, we are back. WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum, and we have with us now our special guest this week, one of the original members of the Four Horsemen, WWE Hall of Famer Tully Blanchard. How's it going, Tully?
Steve, it's great to be with you guys this evening.
And it's great to have you here, Tully. Thanks once again. We wanted to get through your whole wrestling career, but before we really got into that, we wanted to talk about your time at West Texas State. You played quarterback there on the football team, an absolute breeding ground for pro wrestlers. If you follow the history of classic wrestling, so many wrestlers came out of there. Ted DiBiase was on our show not too long ago talking about the same thing. Take us back to your days before pro wrestling and talk to us about West Texas State and how you went from a career in football to a career in wrestling.
Well, West Texas was a great place to go to school. I had gone to college
at SMU in Dallas out of high school, and to play football for Hayden Fry. And he got fired in the middle of my freshman year. And so after the next 2 semesters, with the new coaching staff and everything, it just was not a place where I wanted to be and they wanted me to be. And so I dropped out of school and kind of looked at different schools, and I was really wanting to go to school at in San Marcos because it'd be close for Mom and Dad to come and watch me play and da-da-da-da-da. And so Terry Funk talked to my dad and said, no, Tully got to come to West Texas. So he called the coaches, and Gene Mayfield was the coach up there. So I ended up going up there and talking and kind of doing a tryout thing. And then instead of going directly to school there, I went to junior college and graduated, which made it be where I didn't have to redshirt, because this was back before you could redshirt freshman. You had to redshirt your sophomore year. And I didn't have to redshirt because I graduated junior college, so I was eligible when I first went to West Texas. And when I was there, DiBiase was there, and Tito Santana was there, Merced Solis, and the history of Dusty Rhodes and Goodish and Stan Hansen and Dorian Terry, and the list would go on. And so it was, there was a lot of that kind of nostalgia there, and I played with some really, really great football players. Tito Santana was just an absolutely outstanding tight end and great hands, and played a year up in Canada and was the last cut of the Kansas City Chiefs one year. And when you're the last cut any place, you're good enough to be, if you're in the right place at the right time, you're good enough to play at that level, and he was. My roommate for 2 years, John Ayers, played for 10 years, 11 years with the 49ers, and went to 2 or 3 Super Bowls, and started at left guard for them, and was just a tremendous player. Except he played defense in college and spent all his time in scrimmages and spring training and stuff trying to kill me instead of blocking for me like he did in the pros. And DiBiase played and was plagued with a few injuries and stuff, but was definitely a good player. And then after me, there's been some other guys after me. I think Manny Fernandez went to school there, and I'm not sure of just anybody else, but anyway, I mean, it there was just a list of people that got into professional wrestling, a lot because of Terry and Dory and their affiliation with the school, and then them being the stars that they were in the wrestling business.
Sure. Well, so from the football field, your career begins in wrestling, and you start out in Southwest Championship Wrestling, like you said, the Funks, Dory and Terry, who you worked with early on there, and you also had a partner, another great young talent at the time, Gino Hernandez. If you wouldn't mind telling us what it was like working, I'm assuming learning as well, from Dory and Terry during those early stages of your career there in Texas, and if you would, your memories of a guy who I know we both feel, myself and Steve, certainly left us too soon, Gino, as an in-ring worker, and how high you think maybe his star could have possibly risen had he not left us so soon.
Well, it is, Gino's situation was certainly tragic. He and I had a great run in Houston and Southwest Championship Wrestling, and much like Arn and I later on in my career. In fact, when I first went to work for Crockett Promotions, we called Gino and to see if he would come to work there, and if he would have, he probably there might be a different outcome in what happened to him, which I don't know that the facts are all real clear today, but it certainly would have been a different outcome for him, because he had a future and was talented enough to be a star with WCW or with the WWF at that time, and he would have been. There's no telling how high his abilities could have taken him, but it would have been fun to watch. And I spent a lot of time with Gino, and as Arn and Rick and Barry and I and JJ hung out. You don't develop those lifelong relationships in the wrestling business that much. And when we went back to be inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2012, it was like, we almost hadn't been apart, and we've been apart for 20 some years, and it was just that kind of a camaraderie that was there, and it's neat to be able to do that. We should at least do it at least once every 20 years.
That's some great stuff. Well, you mentioned Jim Crockett Promotions, so I wanted to ask you about your time there. You moved there, and I think you won the TV belt extremely quickly. You have some really good programs, some guys that become very well known. Ricky Steamboat comes to mind immediately, and of course that legendary fight with Dusty Rhodes. Great feud. Certainly, if you're a fan of classic wrestling, you'll remember that feud over Baby Doll. So tell us a little bit about working with Ricky Steamboat prior to his departure for the WWF, and tell us what it was like, your relationship in and out of the ring, working with such a huge name like Dusty Rhodes, and how that relationship was.
Well, working with Steamboat, he was one of the finest talents that the business has ever seen. And, it was building up to Starrcade 1984. I wrestled him, I believe, 4 times. It was first it was a 20-minute time limit for the TV title, then it was 30, then it was 45, then it was 50, and then at Starrcade, we had an hour time limit, and then they put some stipulations that I couldn't run out of the ring and so on and so forth. And the matches before the Starrcade were just it's hard for me to say that a wrestling match is classic, but they would be hard pressed not to be classics. And then we changed. Dusty became the booker, and I had probably the longest run ever with Dusty. We wrestled for probably the next 3 years on and off. And every time we needed to make money, Dusty would do something with me, he and I, and we'd make money. And so it was a very, very fortunate place for me to be. And outside the ring, it was just I didn't socialize with most people in the wrestling business other than Rick and Arn and JJ, and I think that's probably why the Horseman thing, or one of the reasons why the Horseman thing was so successful, is because people saw us not only professionally but socially out together, which made it kind of a band of brothers and there in Charlotte especially, and then as we went across the country, it certainly had its impact. But everybody else in the wrestling business was, they were all kind of their own entities and stuff like that. So I mean, professionally, had a great working relationship with Dusty, and other than that, it wasn't much other than we were alumni of the same school, and my dad gave him his first main event, and some things like that. So anyway, but they're all great memories.
Sure, great memories for us as fans as well. I mean, like you said, it seemed like that feud went on for years and years, and another feud moving along after your TV title runs, you moved up to the U.S. title picture, and another legendary feud that everybody certainly remembers, that I Quit match at Starrcade, was with Magnum TA. So much like Steve just asked you about your run with Dusty, I was hoping you could bring us back and give the listeners a recollection of working with Magnum and that brutal series of bouts that you guys had. And then in working so closely with him for such a long stretch, was wondering what your thoughts were later on down the road when you heard of that unfortunate car accident he was in, that kind of cut his career short way too early.
It definitely cut his career. I mean, it is it's a tribute to him as a man, being able to overcome that and still carry on a successful life. And he's got a good job and is doing well in life, even though he's dealing with the physical struggles. But it was memorable because he beat the crap out of me every night. And, from one end of this country to the other, I mean, we wrestled every night for like 6 months building up to the I Quit match. And he certainly beat the crap out of me in that match. And but that is a lot of what the old school, if I can use that term, was about. It was wrestling was still, from our perspective and from my perspective, was still our ability to make it believable rather than just purely entertainment. And I think the success of people remembering the I Quit match or remembering the program stands as the testament of that. And that's what our goal was every night, was to let everybody know that he didn't like me and I didn't like him. And I think we accomplished that pretty well.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to talk classic wrestling and not talk Tully Blanchard versus Magnum TA in that Starrcade I Quit match. But moving on, we wanted to talk about the Four Horsemen now. Certainly an original member here, Tully Blanchard, with us at WGD Weekly with Stephen the Scum. Tully, we wanted to ask you from your perspective what it was like to be a member of that faction as it was forming with Ole and Arn Anderson, J.J. Dillon, and Ric Flair, how quickly you rose to success. And from your perspective, what does it mean to you to be a horseman both in and out of the ring?
Well, it is when it was happening, you had nothing to compare it to. So you really didn't and couldn't know or tell the impact. As we got into it, the promotion company, and the reason that it is so well remembered is because it was not a promoter's idea. It wasn't Crockett and Dusty and all the powers to be sitting around and say, oh, we're going to put these four guys together and call them the Four Horsemen. It was the World's Heavyweight Champion. It was Ole and Arn, the World Tag Team Champions, who were related. Flair was a cousin of the Andersons, and me, because I was wrestling the Booker, and the Booker wanted to be part of the show, I got to be involved. And so I was the fourth of them, but I was the World Television Champion. And so trying to draw money without having to give matches away or anything, we had a series of 8-man tag matches. And so to do that, it was great entertainment. We sold out buildings, and we prolonged programs because you didn't have to have any matches where anybody got beat, really. And it was impactful, but I think it hit me when the most I was in the car driving to the airport in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I pulled up behind a school bus, and street clothes, car, whatever, and one of the kids in the back of the school bus looking out the back window recognized me, and you could see him turn around and get frantic, and then there must have been 40 little hands stick out the school bus windows on the sides with 4 fingers. And I can remember sitting there. I was on the corner of Woodlawn and South Boulevard, and I'm going, oh, my. I said, this thing is becoming cultish. I mean, I made that thought to myself. And it was just amazing because nothing in wrestling had ever done that. You know, maybe Lou Thez or Ed Strangler Lewis back in the 30s or 40s. But modern day, nothing had ever impacted like that. And it was just amazing to be part of it. And the thing that was really neat, we didn't lose anything when Ole left the company, and they brought Luger in trying to make him a big star quickly and made him one of the Horsemen, which didn't work very long. And then we switched and took Barry. We had success with all 3 groups. And later on, as WCW tried to resurrect the Horsemen, and the 85 guys that they put in there and all the talent that they put in there and never resurrected it, just lets you know it was about chemistry. It wasn't just about talent. It was the chemistry that Rick and Arn and I had, and you throw Barry in there or Ole or Luger and JJ, and there was a tremendous chemistry that happened and a magic that happened that not everybody, even though they were great performers, could not generate that kind of magic in the ring. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Made perfect sense. All right, well, we're about at the halfway point here. We have a new feature that we've been doing in the middle of the interviews here, kind of looking for a little lighthearted take from our guests. So we appreciate having Tully Blanchard here with us on WGD Weekly. And what it is I dropped the 3 R's on our guests, and that is we asked for a story. Being that we're on the subject of the Horsemen, I'm sure there probably is a good story that we can get here. And the 3 R's are road story, rib, or riot scene. So if you could choose one of them and maybe give us a good story from the road, or a funny story from something that happened with the guys. Again, if it's not with the Horsemen, that's fine. But something throughout your career that's a memorable story that we maybe have not heard before.
Well, I always tried to maintain a very serious MO, and I learned very, very young that if you wanted to rib people, there was always retaliation on the ribs, so I didn't play that game. And because there were some very serious guys in the wrestling business that took ribbing to a very serious degree. And so I needed to just stay out of that stuff. And, there were many times in the ring that and around the ring and interacting with fans, probably something that I may have talked about it on some interviews, but not all the time, but probably the most absolute furious I got in my life was in Charleston, West Virginia. And it was a Sunday afternoon show. And usually Sunday afternoon shows, you were tired from the week and you were wore out and you had stayed up too late on Saturday night and you had to wrestle twice on Sunday. And you normally were not exactly the king of personality. And I was going to the ring, wrestled, and I think this was a Magnum TA match, but it might have been a Dusty match, but I think it was Magnum TA. So that would have put it like 1985. And the match was over with, and I was going back to the dressing room. And there in the Charleston Civic Center downtown, when you left ringside, you had to walk up the aisle, which was pretty wide, but where the bleachers on the floor and the seats came down and the wall was, it got to a thing where you had to pass. Only one person could go through and get back to the dressing room area. And so the police escort, they had to get from my sides, one in front, one behind. And, you just kind of duck through little areas like that and get through there quickly, and nobody can take a poke at you or anything like that. So as I duck through that, I get hit with a cup full of warm substance, and all down my neck, shoulder, front, back, and somebody has dumped an entire cup of tobacco spit on me, and I was absolutely came unglued. I started up the bleachers at this guy. Oh, he was gone and out the door, and the police couldn't catch him, and I was beside myself.
Understandable. I mean, you go to the matches and you cheer your favorites and you boo the villains, but I mean that's getting a little out of hand there when you're dumping a cup full of spit on somebody,
Ah.
Yeah. Well, he's lucky you didn't get your hands on him. All right. Well, moving along here while we're still one last question on the subject of the Horsemen here for you before I send it back over to Steve. You had touched on right before that story some of the later incarnations of the group and everything, but when you guys were all inducted into the Hall of Fame a couple of years back, Barry Windham was honored along with Arn, JJ, yourself, and Rick. We mentioned how the original group was Ole, and you had brought up Lex Luger being a member for a little while there. To me, those would be the only two people that possibly would have been considered to be honored with you guys. There were so many others later that, again, like you said, whether it was the camaraderie or whatever, it didn't really just boil down to talent with that group, because everybody that was a part was pretty talented. Do you think any of those other members, could have or should have been included in the induction, whether it was Ole or Luger or which of the lineups that you were involved with did you enjoy the most?
Well, my role with Ole and with Luger was a little bit different. The trend, Arn and Ole were the tag team. I was the other single. I was the U.S. champion or the world television champion, and Flair was the world's heavyweight champion. And so, whether it was six-mans or just tag matches and singles and da-da-da-da-da. So when Ole left, and Ole left probably 6 months into this deal. So it really it was kicking off, but you really didn't have the impact of how great the kickoff was. And then they used us to try to get Luger to a star status real quickly, and we probably did help him some. He had just started in the business and was still learning a lot of things, and even though he did look better than everybody else, but he had a lot to learn. And when the decision to make Barry a heel instead of a babyface, that provided us with probably the best performer that the business may have ever seen, or close to. And so now you've got Ric Flair, you got Barry Windham, Arn, and myself, and it was very, very difficult to find 4 guys that could perform any better than that. They were all in that top shit. There was a lot of guys that worked for our company that were in that same level, but doing their thing to be part of what was as powerful a group for a company that had ever been seen, from Midnight Express to Rock and Roll Express to Ronnie Garvin to Magnum TA before his wreck, and I can't even think of everybody else. The Road Warriors, and the list would continue to go on with the star talent. But the thing that changed was Barry was a much better singles performer, and I had the ability to be a good tag team, a lot from the training that Gino and I had experienced. And so Arn and I being the tag team, now that relegated my role into a different place, if that makes sense. And so that probably gave us the greatest amount of diversity that we had, because when Ole and Arn were the tag team, because of Ole's mind and the way he performed, you could not necessarily do all the things that Arn and I could do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Certainly.
Okay. So we had more diversity. We could wrestle the Road Warriors and Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, and Demolition, the Rockers, the Sheep Herders, and everybody in between. And Barry wrestled singles, U.S. title, whatever, and then Flair certainly, 16 times world heavyweight champion. It gave us the kudos, the ability to be everything that we were. And at that time, we were just the Four Horsemen that was made up of 4 great stars that were stars in their own right. Later on, it became Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, which then you start losing some of your independence, you start losing some of your identity, and may partly have been why it never did get resurrected like they tried to so hard there with WCW.
An interesting take on the Four Horsemen from one of the original members. We have Tully Blanchard here with us. Tully, you mentioned teaming up with Arn Anderson after having a good long singles run. You team up with Arn Anderson, you actually head north for a while to the WWF. Tell us about your move north to the WWF, and tell us about how different it was working for the World Wrestling Federation as opposed to what you were normally used to, and why the run in WWF wasn't that long.
Well, it was just a time in the company that at WCW that they were paying people to keep them working for them, and they didn't want to pay me or Arn, and so we had to look at some options, and the door opened for us to go to WWF at the time, and I think that we brought a lot to their company in the tag team vein, and then it was short-lived because we weren't disgruntled, but we had made a lateral move, and there was no more. We couldn't. There was not a way to get any higher with their company, and WCW had gotten bought by Ted Turner and different things and given contracts away and so on and so forth. So Arn and I just made a phone call, and they offered us a large sum of money if we would leave the WWF and come back and reform the Four Horsemen, and that's what we were going to do. And in that process, my life ended up getting changed because we had that agreement with WCW, and I flunked a drug test, and Vince suspended me in November 2nd of 1989, as their drug policy was, and so I got suspended, and Arn went on to do Survivor Series, and then we were supposed to start that Saturday after with WCW. And they reneged on the deal with me and hired Arn back at a substantially less amount than what they'd promised, which lets you know probably one of the reasons why they're out of business, because they weren't stand-up people. And that was a little bit of a commentary on the side, wasn't it? Yeah. But anyway, but in that process, when Flair called me on November 13th at 1 o'clock in the morning and told me that they had reneged on the deal and they weren't going to give me the contract, I was all of a sudden, in 11 days, I was world champion and promised $750,000 to unemployed. And at 35 years old, I didn't exactly know how to handle that. And at 4:03 in the morning, I said, Jesus, take over my life. And it was the first time I'd ever used the name Jesus when I wasn't cussing somebody. And something happened to me. Something touched my heart and changed my life. And 3 days later, I talked to my dad on the phone, and he said, what happened to you? And I said, I don't know. What do you mean? He said, well, you don't sound the same. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're not cussing. And back in those days, I couldn't get 5 words out of my mouth without saying F something. And I noticed after he brought that to my attention that I hadn't been, and it wasn't a conscious subduing of that type of vocabulary. It wasn't there. It just wasn't coming out anymore. And it was quite amazing. So it got my attention. I started looking and seeing and thinking, and then started reading the Bible and things, and that now has been, this coming November will be 25 years, 89 to 14? 25 years? 24 years.
That sounds about right, yeah.
So,
all right,
but I can still play golf.
There you go. Well, that's a good thing. Well, not to backtrack here, but getting to where we were just talking in the WWF, you and Arn were managed up there by Bobby Heenan. It reminded me pretty much there were 3 legendary managers, Heenan included, that I would say most fans would recall fondly of being in your corner. So if you would, could you kind of compare and contrast the different managers that you had, whether it was Heenan or JJ, and also Baby Doll, who was in your corner for a while, for those great Dusty and Magnum feuds that we earlier talked about?
Well, I mean, you can't contrast and compare Baby Doll to either one of those guys, because Baby Doll was a product of a situation where, if you remember, we had the Perfect 10 contest, and I was looking for the world's perfect woman, whatever, and send your pictures in, blah blah blah, and she was the perfect person for that. I didn't really know that they were looking for Sunshine, and they were looking for this one and that one, which were they couldn't find them, and Dusty and I, we were wrestling Christmas week in Florida because of his relationship with the Grahams, and so we were down there working, and Nicola was down there working also, and she was just radiant, and I told Dusty, I said, she's got to be Baby Doll. I said, bingo. I mean, that's it. She's it. And so we hired her, and she moved to North Carolina. And we presented the world's perfect woman, 6'2", 215 pounds, and beautiful. And that was it. And started a great period of 1985. I mean, it set the stage for that. And then switched, and she threw an angle, and Dusty came in and saved her and perpetuated our program along. And JJ was my manager and was director of Tully Blanchard Enterprises, and then because of his relationship with me, moved into being the Four Horsemen manager and that kind of stuff, and it was great. JJ is if not the best, arguably one of the best managers of all time. Heenan, completely different kind of guy. Both guys could talk. Both guys could do many, many things. You know, and when we went to, Arn and I went to the WWF, you know, Heenan was our manager, but he was only our manager on television and at the big shows. You know, most of the time he was not managing us. I'm not sure where he was, but we were out there on our own, which is okay. I mean, we could do that, but it was not, you know, the three-man unit that you got to see with JJ and the Horseman thing. So, but it was great to be. I'd known Bobby most of my life, and it was great to be around him. The times we were around him, it was great to be around to see how the WWF worked, and you know, I mean, I do not regret working for the WWF in any way, shape, or form. You know, the first time I got to go to Madison Square Gardens and the first main event we ever had in Madison Square Gardens, if you don't work for the WWF, you don't go to Madison Square Gardens. You know, or Maple Leaf Garden in Toronto, and the Montreal Forum, and the places that we got to go around the world that were just unbelievable, and great memories, and great places, and don't regret any of it, except I shouldn't have flunked the drug test. That was a negative thing for me, and but even that turned out to be, you know, one of the best moves that's ever happened to me in my life because of my relationship with Christ and where I am today.
Tully, it's been great having you on our show tonight. Thanks so much. I wanted to get your take on something that was just interesting to me. It wasn't on our list of questions, but I wanted to get it in here anyway. What was your take of the War Games? It was a very new concept, and it was something that people love to see. I know you toured around doing a lot of the War Games. So what was your perspective on being one of the members of War Games?
Well, nobody had a perspective until after the first one was over. And it was a tactical error making Hawk the fourth person in, and that never happened again. And it was a whole different perspective when you were the first or the second guy in with our team versus being the fourth or fifth guy in. And but they were entertaining because the talent was there to make them entertaining, and it was something that was great to be part of it, because the first one in the Omni was just electrifying. I mean, you couldn't for 35 minutes. It was nothing but a roar. And then the second War Games was in the Orange Bowl in Miami, and to see 50,000 people in that place was something I'd never seen before. And then, you know, I mean, it was only topped in my memory that I had been to at WrestleMania in 2012 there in Sun Life Stadium when there was 74,000 people there. Just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, those War Games matches were absolutely amazing. I loved watching them. I actually watched the Orange Bowl one that you mentioned not too long ago. You guys could barely get through the crowd. But no, you were talking about moving on in life after the world of professional wrestling and moving into your ministry. And along the way, though, it seems as though you were backstage at one point in the WWE, if not for just a little while. And there was a conflict with you and Bradshaw, JBL. Clear the air, if you could, Tully, about what happened between you and JBL, and is there any bad blood there?
No. It was, I had been asked to go up to see if there was an opportunity for a place for me to be. We had discussed a couple of things I went to Chicago and St. Louis. And I was working for a man by the name of Bill Glass, who was an all-pro defensive end with the Cleveland Browns and had a ministry. And I worked for them today. And so I'd gone up basically as an interview to see and scope out. And as Vince told me, absorb, because the wrestling business had changed. And they were getting ready to do the taping in St. Louis, and I actually had never really remembered meeting JBL, and he started telling me that I was across the room, that I was a fake preacher, and I was this, and I was that, and I didn't belong there, and that I treated him bad when I was a star, and he was just starting, and blah, 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 blah. And it caught me very off guard, because most everybody that had, I just didn't treat people bad. I didn't, if I didn't like you, I didn't talk to you. I said hello, and I didn't mess with you. That's just the way I was. And I just didn't remember it. So I told him, I said, well, it's very possible that I did treat you poorly. And I said, I hope you can forgive me. And that's all that was said on my part, and we departed. And I jumped on an airplane the next morning and went back we were doing a prison event in Marianna, Florida. And but there was something that he said that I don't belong here. And it was like a light went on in my head, in my heart, wherever, that I didn't belong there. And so I called John Laurinaitis up and said, I said, the job that I do right now is very important, and I was getting paid, certainly not at wrestling standards, but I was getting paid pretty well. And I said, I don't have, there's not a place for me to leave. I'm not finished with what I'm doing here yet. And so he said fine. And then, and the first person I saw at WrestleMania 12, I mean not 12, but at 2012 at WrestleMania in Miami for the induction, was JBL, and in the restaurant in the bar, and just me and him. And he actually apologized for what he had said, and we didn't sit down and work buddy pal, but I mean, we talked a few things about a few things later on, and that's all it was. But it is certainly a possibility that I did meet him at an early time in his life at a TV show or something, and I was quite full of myself back in those days. That's how I made a living, projecting that kind of persona, and it was a natural persona. So there was a lot of people who didn't like me in this country, and they used to cheer for Dusty and everybody else quite fervently to watch me get beat up. So I wasn't afraid of that, but it was I'd certainly been a great number of years out of that light, so I wasn't used to that, and the only thing I could do was ask him to forgive me, and that's what I did. So hopefully he has, and life goes on.
Sure. Well, we appreciate you addressing that with us, Tully. We kind of, just to explain to you briefly, we kind of pride ourselves as fans of, again, hence the name Wrestling's Glory Days Weekly, of the, an era sort of gone by in wrestling. And even though we broadcast our show, it goes across the internet, a lot of the things, both Steve and I, one of the things that first got us in here is you hear some stories that, just get blown out of proportion. And when we have some of the people on here to clear the air like you just did, again, I never really heard a full story on that. We had seen, so we figured we would ask with an opportunity there. Like when you said, I definitely had never heard the part about, that you guys sat down and talked or anything about that. So we really appreciate you addressing something like that with us. We sort of, pride ourselves on, the truth being told about things, because with all the different sites, and anyone can be a quote unquote reporter or expert, with the internet. And so you never really know sometimes. We've had some people with stories that completely were not true, that didn't sound true, and so we like to kind of pride ourselves on, setting the record straight on some things like that. So we really appreciate you addressing that. All right, thanks. And lastly, one more question before I'm going to send it back over to Steve to wrap things up here, and that was you kind of addressed earlier when you talked about way back at the beginning of the interview here about how when you guys got back together for the Hall of Fame induction, how that tightness with, Barry and Rick and Arn and JJ, and it was almost like even though it had been 20 years, you guys hadn't been apart. So, eventually, years later, you would do some stuff with WWE. I remember you coming back for that emotional tribute after Ric Flair had lost the match at WrestleMania to Shawn Michaels, and they did the retirement ceremony, and then obviously with the Hall of Fame induction. So I would imagine both of those moments was as close as you're explaining that you guys had been over the years, had to be pretty emotional and, feel-good moments for everyone involved. So we were hoping to close out and getting you to look back and remember on first being a part of that special night that honored Ric Flair on Raw, and then last year experience of getting back together with the Horsemen and being honored and involved with the whole WrestleMania weekend and Hall of Fame ceremony, taking your long overdue place among the legends.
The thing with Flair was, it was great to be there and the first ones to walk out in Miami, not Orlando, and it was just a wonderful evening for him. Nobody has ever had a tribute like that as they depart the business. Although I think Flair has departed the business 20 times since then and been re-brought back in 20 times, so I'm not sure just exactly how all that equates. But, it was neat to be able to see what went on there in Orlando and to be part of Monday Night Raw, and then being part of the festivities in Miami. Probably the neatest thing of all of that was to have my children there, because my 4 children they weren't alive during that part of my life. And so it was a great thing to be able to have all 4 of them there and be around the hotel and go to the things that we went to, and then be part of the ceremony and sit in the audience and being able to introduce them to wrestling fans and have that on the air, and then be part of for them to be able to sit up there in the box and to watch us get introduced to 74,000 people and people start chanting "Horseman, Horseman," you know, and it was just an absolutely wonderful 4 days.
It must have been. That's awesome. I know myself and the Scum sat down and watched you guys get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Something special for us because we watched you guys form from the inception all the way through to your induction into the Hall of Fame. So really, really cool stuff there. But Tully, we're about out of time. We have one last thing we'd like to ask you to do, and that is a name association with a couple of guys that you were with in your past. So let's get right down to it. I got 5 guys here, and the first one I want to go with is a guy that I ask everybody about just because he's so popular and from the glory days of professional wrestling. So let's start it out with an easy one with Andre the Giant.
Andre. You know, I mean, that was they broke the mold with Andre. If Andre liked you, he was a great guy, and if he didn't like you, you better watch out. And my greatest outside the ring story with Andre the Giant is I sat next to him in first class on an airplane one time, and he looked at me and he said, "Boss, you drink with me at 8:00 in the morning." And I said, "Andre, I can't. No, I can't." And he looked at me one more time. He said, "Boss, you drink with me." And so, there I am having Bloody Marys at 8:00 in the morning. Oh my God! And so anyway, I miss Andre.
That is great. I know myself, the Scum, and all of Scum Nation love a good Andre story, that's for sure. So let's talk about another guy that is always talked about on our show here, and another West Texas guy, and that's Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch.
Oh, well, that is Dickie was a great talent in this business, and in 1984 and first part of 85 was there, and it was money when you wrestled guys like that. So and it was fun to wrestle guys that you could make money with.
That's great. Captain Redneck, Dick Murdoch, certainly one of our favorites again at WGD Weekly. Let's talk about another guy that you spent a lot of time in the ring with in your NWA years, but never once probably ever wrestled. That's legendary referee Tommy Young.
Tommy Young. Tommy Young was as good a referee as the business has ever had. He took it very serious. He worked very, very hard and was very focused. And sometimes a pain in the rear, but just a great referee. And I saw him at an autograph show, probably back in August, maybe November. He might have been in Winston-Salem in November. But it was very, 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 very great guy, and you knew your stuff would get done right when he was in the ring with you.
That's great to hear. Tommy Young, certainly my favorite referee of all time. It was great meeting him. It was at that WrestleCade, as a matter of fact. Let's move on and talk about another guy here that you, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, you had crossed paths with in San Antonio. I'm not sure if you actually had wrestled him or not, but another guy that's so legendary and one of mine and the Scum's favorites, Bruiser Brody.
He was here at times. He lived here. I don't think I had switched heel, and I never worked with him here. But he impacted my life one time we were in the gym, and I asked him why he did so much stuff with his legs, and he said, when you get old, what carries you? Good point. So that's why I do step-ups and stuff still today. So.
Oh, that's an interesting story. I'd never heard that before. Well, Tully, I got one more guy for you, actually a team for you to talk about before we let you go tonight, and that is the team that you had your run with in WWF, and that's Barry Darsow and Bill Eadie, Axe and Smash, Demolition.
Well, that was who we were married to for as much as our time with the WWF, and really the last program that I ever did in the business was against those guys, and both of them were great guys to work with, and we drew as much money as we possibly could with those guys as we went around the country and Canada. And it was a great joy.
That is awesome to hear. Thanks so much, Tully, once again for joining us at WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. We're going to let you go, Scum. Before we do you have any final words for Tully Blanchard?
I don't have any more questions. I wanted to give a heartfelt thank you for Tully for sitting down with WGD Weekly here for about an hour of his time, and just let him know it was an absolute thrill, as two fans that grew up watching him and all the great stuff that he did with the Horsemen before and after that as well. Just wanted to thank him for being with us, and I'm sure our listeners will be equally as excited to hear him, and be welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for joining us here on WGD Weekly, Tully.
Guys, thank you for having me. Bless you.
Hi, this is the Hands of Storm, Ronnie Garvin with WGD Weekly with Steve and Scum.
All right, we are back, all you savages in Scum Nation, WGD Weekly with Steve and the Scum. We just got done with a great interview with Tully Blanchard. That was great, Scum.
Unbelievable. It never gets old having these guys that you grew up such a fan of come on here and the great stories that they have to tell. And, I don't think he could have put it better. Probably the most famous Tully Blanchard moment, other than obviously the Horseman, which knock your socks off to hear, when he was telling that story about driving down the street and getting out of his car and the whole school bus, a little kid sticking the four fingers out the window. When he kind of realized, wow, this is really catching fire here. But again, one of the most famous things probably is that Magnum TA feud, and the way he put it best when it was, what was the magic there? What were some of your favorite moments? And he says, well, he pretty much beat the shit out of me for all over the country, So it looked great because he was pounding the piss out of me. Thought that was great because those are brutal matches. That the one that is most famous, the I Quit match, but the whole series of TA matches with Tully Blanchard, unbelievable, great stuff.
That was sure to put both of them on the map. That feud, without a doubt. In their growth of their character or whatever, that feud made both of them much more popular. Interesting stuff, setting the record straight with the whole JBL thing. I thought that was cool. And I also, you think about a guy that just walked away from the sport. Now, it wasn't under the best of terms. That was very evident. But,
yeah.
Tully Blanchard walked away essentially in the prime of his career and really never came back. Another one of the guys, kind of like Kevin Von Erich, that you didn't even see making those kind of, guest appearances or the comebacks during that late 90s era. He was just gone off the map, and he was one hell of a worker.
Sure. That's 3 in a row we've had that were just one hell of a believable worker that kind of faded off into the sunset at a young age and didn't make that return that a lot of people did. Because Ronnie Garvin last week, who, had great things to say about our guest this week, Tully Blanchard. Ronnie was the same way, kind of when it was time to hang it up, not, let people remember you for what you were, those great moments. Always interesting to me. It seems like a lot of people, and Tully didn't get too deep into it, but just with the way that he talked about interesting takes on the Dusty Rhodes as a booker. One of Tully's greatest rivals, and how he said when the Four Horsemen was formed was pretty much on camera. You had the Andersons and their cousin Ric Flair, and then I was fighting the booker, and he wanted to be on the biggest thing, so I was in there. Interesting twist on how Tully and Flair and the Andersons came together. I love Dusty Rhodes, one of the most charismatic performers of all time. I mean, you can't argue that. Dusty was fantastic, but some of the guys that we speak with, an interesting take. It just seems like he didn't have much. And again, this is all hearsay. Obviously, I wasn't there to say it. Just seemed like Dusty almost didn't want someone to be above him or, more popular than him or something. Steve, what was your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that, or I think it was almost more financial based, like money based. It seemed like,
definitely, yeah.
Both Ronnie Garvin and Tully Blanchard were adamant about, he kind of followed the money and he kind of followed the guy that was getting the most heat, and then he would come in as the the fan favorite and make all the money. So he had the power. He was in a position to where he could pencil himself in to feud with anybody. So I guess, you can look at it from two different ways. I mean, there's the greedy, don't really care what you're doing to the other guys, which, I think has been kind of implied over the last couple of weeks on our show. Or you can simply look at it as, well, I mean, wouldn't you follow the money? If you were the booker and you were a wrestler, like a full-time wrestler, and you hear a lot of people say, that are, experienced in the wrestling business, not so much from us, Scum, but you hear a lot of people mention that, wrestlers aren't always the best bookers. And I think that's, that stands true here. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, well, again, take nothing away because you can't deny that Dusty Rhodes was certainly a moneymaker. So, I mean, him putting himself in those matches, people definitely were also paying to see Dusty Rhodes.
Oh, totally.
But it's just interesting to put, if I can use I don't know if you would call it a euphemism or what you would, the term isn't coming to me at this point, but interesting how all those times when Dusty was at the top of the card after hearing Ronnie Garvin and Tully Blanchard, how some way or another with that pencil in his hand, he would wind up doing the old flip, flop, and fly right to the top of the card, if you will.
Exactly. And I mean, the only reasons to do that are to be noticed and to make money. So, I mean, old school territorial wrestling was, that ran rampant. And I think because Dusty Rhodes is such a popular figure in the world of wrestling amongst fans, that, his stories and the things that he's done along the way become a little bit more evident to people because it was more popular than some of the smaller time bookers. But I'm sure there's a million stories out there of the same type of stuff. So, that's one of the funny things about wrestling.
One thing you can't take away from Rhodes is he obviously was a health nut, always spent a lot of time in the gym and watching what he ate and everything. I mean, because he was always in the peak physical condition.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes when you're a young kid, you didn't quite know what you were watching. Is that Playboy Buddy Rose or is that Dusty Rhodes?
Yeah. Well, again, I obviously I jest when I say that, but you can't deny the legacy of Dusty Rhodes. Like him or not, booker or performer, whatever you want to say. Certainly, much like our guest today, earned a rightful spot in the WWE Hall of Fame not too long ago. And speaking of which, Steve, some interesting developments there with the WWE Hall of Fame of late.
Yeah, man, absolutely. The first two inductees this year are friggin' awesome. The Ultimate Warrior, obviously, in. Everybody knows by now. This past week, they announced Jake the Snake Roberts, one of our guests at WGD Weekly, Show of the Year guy. So, what the hell? Who's next, man? I mean, now it's in Louisiana, so you can speculate maybe some Mid-South guys, maybe some guys you weren't quite expecting, but so far, so good.
Absolutely, Steve. And again, it's funny because if you'll remember way back when we weren't even doing guests every week, prior to the, it might have been our episode 6, maybe episode 4, right around there, right around the time that Scum hopped on board and we started getting this freight train moving in the right direction. We had a program that was focused around the Ultimate Warrior coming on with that video game commercial. And
right. Yes,
I believe both Steve and the Scum at that point, it's a good 6-7 months back now, were pretty adamant about the fact of Ultimate Warrior Hall of Fame this year. Yeah, you heard. I mean, I guess it wasn't too big of a call. I mean, once he was back in the fray, but you never know with some of the outlandish stuff that's come out of his mouth over the years if they would coexist. But, even with Jake and him, I thought it was interesting. They had a back and forth before Jake was announced where Jake kind of made a comment on one program about now they're letting a bunch of assholes in. And Warrior fired back. But I thought it was, spoke to maybe the happiness or his content with being back in the WWE universe in a performer capacity. The Warrior offered his congratulations, kind of made a joke about it, like, well, there's a couple assholes in now, Jake, very deserving, and congratulations to you. Who's the next asshole going to be? So very cool to see that, and hats off to Jake the Snake Roberts, who's busted his ass, got his life back together. He made that Dynamite appearance we talked about on the Old School Raw. He was great with us. We've told the story, he kind of got cut short and had to come back on, was real accommodating. What a great guy, what a great story. And here he is, almost, I don't know if it was where it began, but certainly early career, he had that run in Mid-South, Louisiana. And there he is, the Superdome, Jake the Snake's going to get his just due. I mean, like you said, Steve, and maybe we see a couple of our upcoming guests. Maybe the Rock and Roll Express gets some look. They had a good run down there in Louisiana. What about JC, Jimmy Cornette, and the Midnight Express? It'd be pretty cool if they got in. I know he said he doesn't have interest, but I find that extremely hard to believe if they came knocking,
Yeah, what about my man 2? Wrestling 2.
Yeah, throw your 2s in the air. Like, what if they could get 2 in? Wouldn't it be great if they could somehow hand out like 18,000 white masks?
Dude, that's great. Like, we talked about this on one of our shows too. Real quick about the that Mid-South DVD WWE came out with. Dude, that's an awesome DVD set. One of the best they've ever done, in my estimation. Anyway, but he's in it a lot. And that angle with Magnum TA, it's on the first disc, is fantastic. So, can never get enough of 2. Some other great guys from that era, Scum, who aren't in. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are in. But Dr. Death, I don't think he's in.
No.
I don't know. Some people will argue maybe his worthiness, but I mean, he was a legend of Mid-South and certainly made his mark all over the place.
Sure. You just mentioned one. What about TA? I mean, I know it was a short career, but I mean, I guess he could certainly, put what he did in that time up there with anybody. How about another old favorite of ours? I know he wasn't too long with the Mid-South, but we spoke about this off air not too long ago. How the hell is King Kong Bundy not in the Hall of Fame? I said to you, Steve, when we were saying that, how many people can say that they main evented I can think of 2 guys, and neither one of them's in the Hall of Fame. How many people can say that they main evented a WrestleMania with Hulk Hogan, the man who, for all intent and purposes, WrestleMania, Hulkamania at the height? I mean, more than a coincidence there. I mean, he was as synonymous with the first 8 WrestleManias, even 9, as anybody. It didn't even seem possible they could do it without him. But who can say they main evented WrestleMania with Hulk Hogan and also was a part of the streak?
Yep, 2 people.
King Kong Bundy can.
Bundy and Sid.
Yeah, and Sid, who never gets talked about, but multiple-time WWE champion, multiple-time WCW champion, member of the Horsemen at one point, Taker, Hogan at Mania. Again, I know maybe people are, he worked this, he went and played softball. Then you can't deny what the guy did. And also, getting back to the man who would call for the 5 count, get Bundy in there already. Come on.
Yeah, dude. Bundy is great. I mean, Stud's in there. I think Bundy and Stud's career are pretty linear as far as it goes, overall popularity. Now, I know Stud had that big rivalry with Andre and was a little bit taller, so there's an argument to be made there. But if you look at it from a little bit more of a broader perspective, I think Big John Stud's career and Bundy's career were about the same. I mean, what about Bundy's time in Texas? He lost his hair in Texas. He had that huge rivalry with Von Erichs.
Mid-South, Georgia. I mean, Bundy had great runs everywhere. I mean, I'll say this to the day I die. I mean, I was a kid, and it was long before you knew about creative meetings and emergency booking things that were being called. I remember when that Saturday night's main event, when Morocco held Hogan to the corner and Bundy injured the ribs. I remember as a kid thinking King Kong Bundy is going to win the belt. We're going to win the strap at WrestleMania 2. I mean, I know looking back now, it was very unlikely. But at the time, as a kid, I was like, this monster is going to beat Hogan.
The walking condominium, as the late Gorilla Monsoon would say, with the avalanche. I think that move, his finisher wasn't the avalanche. That was his move, was that setup move where he'd run into you in the corner going about 60.
Yeah.
The guy weighed over 400 pounds.
Yeah, the walking condominium. He's totally out of control.
Love us some
There's
Gorilla
rules and
at
regulations
WGD
to abide
Weekly.
by around here.
That's awesome. Well, who else do you think, Scum, should go into the Hall of Fame this year? You talk Rock and Roll Express. Now, our ballot, we got Wrestling 2, Bundy, all great ones. If you're listening out there, leave us your estimations, your predictions at WGD Weekly on Twitter.
Well, Steve, I was just kind of touching on the guys who went through Louisiana. Again, Macho Man Savage definitely deserves to be in there. I don't know what the deal is with his brother and his family and all that, and obviously that's why. Bullshit. But he definitely deserves in there. The British Bulldogs, I would say, deserve in there.
He's not in the Hall of Fame?
No, neither of them are. I don't know why they're not in there, but the Bulldogs, Demolition.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill Eadie especially, but I was watching those early episodes of Raw. Dude, the Repo Man is very underrated. That guy was great. Hilarious stuff.
What about another guest that we actually talked about it with? What about Ivan Koloff?
Yeah, man, he's definitely worthy. You know what was cool? We were at WrestleCade. We walked by his exhibit or where he was sitting and signing autographs. Dude, I took a picture of his title belt from WWF. It's killer. It's like it's blue leather belt with obviously the centerpiece all posted on the show. It's really, really cool.
But yeah, a couple guys that we talked to, Steve, that had legendary feuds. Let's talk. Last year the big hubbub was about Bruno finally going in, and Ivan Koloff certainly ended that 7.5-year reign. Everyone was talking about that last year. Maybe Koloff will go in this year. And now with the other guys and everything that's happened, a year goes by and everyone forgets. Another one of our guests, Larry Zbyszko, had the legendary feud with Bruno. He was a part of WrestleMania last year. Larry, certainly deserving. Another guy that feuded with Bruno, living up to his moniker that an old friend of ours that used to sit shirtless behind a drum kit used to always spew. He lived up to the moniker with Bruno when he used to say, "I's just like breaking necks." What about Stan Hansen?
Absolutely, man. Well, Ferkin, what about Brody?
You can't really say one without the other, can you?
No. I mean, immediately you think of both of them. Absolutely. I mean, fucking Abdullah's in. How much time did he do in WWF? Like 2 nights in Madison Square Garden in 1971.
Yeah, I think much like I was saying with Rhodes earlier, I think a lot of it has to do, McMahon's always been a big, fitness guy. And so I think that at one point he was turned down flat by Abby to have him be the spokesperson for Ico Pro and be a guest poser in the WBF pay-per-view that they were going to do. He was his first choice before Luger was to have Abby out there, showing the full body flex and especially the pecs.
Yeah, Abdullah the Butcher has the only man I know that has a 6-pack on his forehead. But you're talking about pecs. What about Luger?
Very good point. Again, these all people that you're bringing up, guests from the show previously. Yeah, Lex Luger definitely deserves in. Hey, another one that could possibly get in this year and next year that the wires, the sheets are on fire over is. What about Sting?
Sure. And it's almost worth talking about because it seems to be every year there's more and more, but, until he's there, he's not there. That's how I see it at this point. I mean,
Yeah, me too. But that just popped another thing. The guy that every year you hear that he's going to fight, a fellow that passed away last year that is very near and dear to The Undertaker. Paul Bearer get in this year?
Oh, man, that's a good call. Maybe they're waiting to put them both in together. I was always assuming that. But, it could be. I mean, that's a very good call. I just always kind of thought they would go in at the same time. I mean, clearly Undertaker's going in. I mean, that's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. I think Bearer will go in at some point too. 30th anniversary of WrestleMania. I know they have that celebrity wing. If you want to talk as far as when the event first came about, you know, you got your Drew Carey's and your Pete Roses and these guys that have been voted in on the celebrity wing, Donald Trump. Who was more synonymous with the first 2 years of WrestleMania than Mr. T?
Yep, T. Good call there.
I mean, I don't know what his deal is or what, you know. No, I haven't seen him since years ago when he would do those foolish commercials almost making fun of himself. But it would be pretty cool. I mean, the rumor has it that Hogan's going to have be in some capacity involved with WWE around that time. It'd be pretty cool to have Hulk Hogan induct Mr. T.
I was thinking Piper.
Yeah, I wonder if they buried the hatchet. You know, I guess age and time heals all wounds. That would be interesting to see. You know.
Yeah, totally. Well, you know, you always want a good storyteller or someone with something to say that's going to be interesting. And I mean, how can you go wrong with what we have already for sure with the Ultimate Warrior, dude? His speech is going to be off the hook. And Jake obviously has great story to tell here. Well, a story with a great ending anyway. So, you know, very interesting to see what
here's another one that just popped in my mind. Just when you said that the Warrior speech on, I believe on Raw the night that they announced that he was going to go in, one of the broadcasters mentioned, I can't wait to hear that speech, about Bradshaw.
Oh, dude.
Ron Simmons is in.
Yep. Yeah, Bradshaw had a good career overall. I mean, you know, I thought it was interesting to see his character change from being Bradshaw from the Acolytes to the JBL character, but I thought he did a great job. It certainly fit him, and he still kind of uses a little bit of that character today. So, you know, thinking about a lot of these guys, the tremendous workers, and, you know, our guest today, Tully Blanchard, was – I mean, I don't think we haven't talked enough about just his ability to work in the ring. I mean, he was a grinder, guy not of super size. He wasn't that tall. He was next to me at WrestleCade, maybe 6'1", 6'2", maybe. Not a very tall guy, and a big, you know, like a huge, what you think of a pro wrestler. He's kind of more of the, you know, Arn Anderson build of it, just kind of like a man, just that would go in and perpetually look 35 years old and fight you like man-to-man style. Like when you think of Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard's a very similar guy in his demeanor, but wrestled a different style of match. But I always thought he was great, and there's a lot of similarities in what he did in the ring that, you know, to what you see nowadays. You know, when you were talking about WrestleMania and some of the guys that are going to be competing this year, you know, there are guys on the current roster that do kind of resemble what Tully Blanchard could do, you know, when it came to in-ring ability.
Oh, definitely, Steve. I mean, again, to be honest with you, in today's day and age, a lot of the guys, especially that have been endeared to the internet wrestling fan, the boom over the last 10, 15 years, that, you know, it's just hard to deny. I mean, a lot of those guys that the people really like are those smaller workers that can really go. You know, your guys like a CM Punk. CM Punk held the WWE title for what, 434 days or something crazy like that. Yeah. You know, right now, I mean, this past weekend we saw the absolute outcry after the Royal Rumble. I mean, I have referred to it as times as a collective hissy fit from WWE Universe over Daniel Bryan not being in / winning the Royal Rumble. I mean, thank God that he wasn't in it and got thrown out. Or you know, someone might have bombed the arena up there in Pittsburgh, but it was I mean, your performers like a Tully Blanchard or Arn Anderson, they weren't as flashy necessarily, but the times have changed. You know, I mean, you can't argue that when you flip on WWE programming today, if you could take your Tully Blanchard, your Arn Anderson, maybe your Macho Man Randy Savage or Ricky Steamboat, you know, Bret Hart, Ric Flair, it's hard to argue that the guys who are having those matches that might not be the biggest, strongest looking guy that are kind of stealing the show every night are your CM Punk and your Daniel Bryan.
Yep, absolutely. Guys like them, Dolph Ziggler, another guy, can bounce around the ring all over the place, and it's, you know, we have our opinions regarding, you know, like who's good now, and I probably watch the current product is about as regular as I'm going to. I probably watch Monday Night Raw on Monday night, maybe 2-3 times a month. You know what I mean? But we've had guys on, and I don't know if this was somebody that we've already had on or someone we will have on. Somebody said this recently to us is that you could turn that show off for 6 months and turn it back on and see the exact same show.
Yeah, pretty much. It is unfortunate. I mean, I'll always, always a supporter no matter what. Again, what you have is certainly better than if it wasn't there. I mean, and I don't mean to make that sound terrible because that really sounds kind of lousy, but I think I'm just in an older mind frame than a lot of what people were outraged about, and that I have faith in the product, and I just find it extremely hard to believe, Steve, that Triple H and Vince McMahon, or whoever is in charge of creative, Stephanie McMahon or whoever people are answering to up there, I find it hard to believe that they're out of touch with the product. I mean, like everybody is saying. Now, Triple H, remember, 1996, on the way out the door, Razor Ramon and Diesel, he was a part of that curtain call at Madison Square Garden when things weren't going so bad in the clique. That everyone likes to refer to, the off-screen clique, Shawn Michaels, Waltman, Ramon, Diesel, Triple H in his younger years. There's that infamous story about them, saying, we're not doing it, we need to talk, and Vince flying out to meet with them and them saying, it can't be the cartoon guys, it can't be this or that. So, I mean, he's been in touch with the product for an awful long time. He's lived the product for an awful long time. He knows that people are saying, here's Hunter again, putting over his boys. I mean, was it coincidental that that's the outcry that everyone has in the Daniel Bryan thing? And on screen, he's the one holding, quote unquote, Daniel Bryan down. And then at the Royal Rumble, the only surprise entrant is his boy, quote unquote, Kevin Nash. Batista wins the Rumble. Orton keeps the title. The New Age Outlaws are suddenly back winning the World Tag Team titles. I mean, is it maybe a case of the fact that the hissy fit I spoke of earlier, the internet wrestling community that complains that creative can't go and stay with a storyline for any length of time like they always complain they can? Did the internet wrestling community blow their collective wad a couple months early, and maybe Daniel Bryan is going to get his comeuppance at the biggest show of the year?
Yeah, man, I totally agree. It seems highly unlikely at this point that Daniel Bryan's not going to be the focal point of WrestleMania. So it remains to be seen. I think that you're absolutely right in the fact that Triple H and Vince McMahon, they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their company, and they're going to do very well. So moving on to that, I wanted to talk about something. Speaking of Monday Night Raw, I watched Raw this week. I watched the Monday Night Raw on Monday night, and I watched Monday Night Raw from March of 1993. So I feel I did my job. I watched current Raw, and I watched Raw from 1993. Damian Demento getting a lot of play back then. The first couple of weeks of Raw I've been watching. Real interesting stuff. And, bringing it back to the glory days of classic wrestling, I mean, it was a much different product than what you see now. Vince is great. Savage was pretty good, but who the heck was that other idiot? I totally forgot about that guy. What's his name?
Rob Bartlett.
Yes, he is a complete moron.
Yeah.
Absolutely no business being on the televisions. I guess he was some radio DJ. I'm reading between the lines. I think he was a radio DJ or something.
Yeah, he was like a shock jock in New York City back at the time,
right.
Kind of like your Bubba the Love Sponge or one of those local guys, that was big at the time. And I think they were just going for an edgy feel. The Raw was the first live show they did, and I think that at the time McMahon was trying to capitalize on the New York City feel, and that's why they had Bartlett there. So
yeah. They did this thing. They kept doing this thing where they would go around to each announcer and they would start something with it. You would be like uncensored, uncut, and something or other. And they almost never got it right. Like it was always something like Savage would always be like, and I'm going to kick your teeth in instead of saying the right thing. Interesting stuff. Who else was getting kind of a little pushback then? Or he had a little feud going with his old handler. So that'll give you a clue. Kim Chi. Kamala and Kim Chi playing a good role last night in Monday Night Raw. They were in a battle royal, and Kim Chi and Kamala eliminated each other. They were chasing each other around the arena. It was great. The week before that, they did something with, I forget what it was, but dude, it was great watching these old Raws. Great channel on YouTube. I'm not telling anyone who it is. You're gonna have to find out the hard way because I don't want this guy to get shut down. It's great stuff. But anyway, he has like the first full like 3 or 4 years of Monday Night Raw on YouTube. So that's what I've been watching through my PlayStation. Kind of waiting for that WWE Network, though, dude. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm totally buying that product.
Absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't buy it? You got all the old pay-per-views. You got some cool new programming. You got the Legends House. It's where it pays it for itself if you watch the pay-per-views every month. I mean, tenfold. So, big fan of the network that's coming out. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, who knows that one little icon that I saw throughout watching some of the walkthroughs, there's one that says From the Vault. So I can only imagine what's behind that little link. I'd love to click on that and see what's in there. I know I saw I saw several of the old territorial wrestling, logos, the World Class Championship Wrestling logo. I think I saw Mid-South, of course, Crockett Promotions, that Shield. So it's pretty cool to see that they're going to have a bunch of stuff on the download just for classic wrestling fans. So I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. I think the whole wrestling world I think everyone's a little upset right now, maybe with the whole Daniel Bryan situation, but I think overall, first and foremost, I think he gets his day. I think that the fan base, as much as they want to get angry with it, there's no other game in town. I think that, that they'll be there. I think WWE, regardless of people getting mad, they always come back around. And, I think that this will go. I like you said, Steve, I think at the end of WrestleMania, Daniel Bryan is thrusting his fingers up in the air, much like Austin was on the corner turnbuckle, flipping the double bird, much like Hogan was doing the flex after Andre and Heenan were getting carted out of the Silverdome.
Yeah.
So, I think in the end, I think that everybody will be happy. Everyone will be on board with the network. I think WrestleMania, I'm looking forward to it personally. And I think that about brings us to our closing here for this week for WGD Weekly. Steve, anything last-minute thoughts as we head toward next week and the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan?
I am very much looking forward to that interview as well. Another one of my favorites growing up as a kid. Like I said, one of the most sadistic madmen ever. Huge sports fan. And speaking of sports, Scum, it's Super Bowl Sunday. Before we head out, quick picks from you. Who do you got winning the Super Bowl this year?
I guess I'd like to see Seattle just because, but I think it's Manning's year. I think he had a great season, and I'd be surprised to see Denver lose, but I wouldn't mind seeing it if that makes any sense. So I guess if you're asking for a pick, I'd have to say Denver.
There you go with the Denver Broncos. I'm going to pick the Seattle Seahawks simply because I like a good defense. It's the number one offense versus the number one defense, so that's really cool. And I know they're wrestling fans. They have to be. After the promo that Richard Sherman cut and the fact that their defense is named the Legion of Boom, I'm fairly certain there's some wrestling fans on that football team. So I'm going to go with the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle, Denver tonight. Enjoy our show. Enjoy the Super Bowl. We'll see you next week. We got Kevin Sullivan.
And if you took one thing from the program this week, people, do not throw a cup full of tobacco at Tully Blanchard.